One of the biggest challenges you can have as an intermediate blues player is getting stuck on the old status quo shuffle, and then you hear more advanced players and you think, what are all those jazz chords that they seem to know, but I don't? Well, in this video, all should be revealed, and we'll learn how you can go from this to something more like this.
There's a huge amount packed into these 12 bars and we'll be moving through quite quickly, so I recommend you download the tab using the link below so you can follow along in detail.
By the end of this video, I hope that not only will you have a new selection of chord shapes to work with, but a much deeper understanding of how these chords are formed that will carry forward into your music far beyond today. Now, as a side note, if you're interested in blending jazz into your blues solos, then the harmonic concepts we're going to learn here are really the essential starting point as well.
As we'll be working with more advanced chords, let's start by looking at the theory of how chords are built using the example of C major. So what you're looking at here is 2 octaves of a C major scale. Here's the first octave and here's the second. Now, in blues, we normally play all major chords as a dominant 7, so this scale has got a B flat in it rather than the usual B natural you'd expect to see in C major, so you could think of this as being C mixolydian. Now let's number each note in this scale, 1, 2, 3, 4 and so on, but notice when we get to the second octave, when we get back to C, rather than going back to 1, we keep going, 8, 9, 10, etc. And the reason for this, you'll see in a moment. Now chords are generally built in thirds, and if we take away every other note, you'll see what we're left with. So C to E, they're a third apart, and then E to G, a third apart, G to B flat, another third, and so on and so forth. So these notes in the first octave, these are our basic chord tones, which I guess give us basic sounds, but then in the second octave you'll see we get the 9, 11 and 13. These are known as extended harmony notes and they give us those much more sophisticated jazz sounds. These extended harmony notes can be made either flat or sharp to give even more out there jazz sounds, but there's really no need to be scared when you see these numbers written in chords once you understand this concept. So throughout this video you'll see graphics like this on screen which show not only the chord shape that we're working with but which notes from the scale are being included. Anyway, let's crack on with the playing, starting with shell voicings.
On guitar we're conditioned from the start to play as many notes as possible, so typically a C7 might be played like this, with 6 notes. But with a shell voicing, we want to use the minimum number of notes to spell out the chord, which actually gives greater clarity to the sound. Now, if we were playing with a bass player, we only really need 2 notes, the 3rd and the 7th, an E and a B flat in the case of C, and this will perfectly outline the chord to the listener. So I'm taking those 2 notes straight from our original C7 chord. So the B flat would be here, 8th fret on the D string, and the E here, 9th fret on the G string. But since we're playing alone, let's also add in a root note with the thumb over the top here to play this C on the 8th fret of the low E. Now these 3 notes perfectly outline the chord and each comes through clearly. Just note, I'm also making sure this A string is being muted. What we're also able to do with this chord is make a little bar at the 8th fret on the D and G strings and use a hammer-on just on the G string up to the 9th, which gives a cool bluesy movement from the minor to the major 3rd. So that's our C, but now if we take these 2 notes on the D and G strings and move chromatically down 1 fret, you'll see we now have an A and an E flat, which are the 3rd and 7th of an F7, which is our 4 chord. So with an F root note, we could play an F7 like this. Now you'll see this chromatic movement from here down to here gives these 2 chords a real sense of belonging together. Much more so than if you were to play them as bars like that right across the neck. So looking at our 12 bar, what we have to start is this. So we get this little pickup to kick off, and then straight into C7 for 1 bar. using that little hammer on there, and then for bar 2, straight up to F7. But we're also able to use this little chromatic slide into that F from 1 fret below. And this is something you'll see a lot in this style of playing. Then we can add an extra note to this C chord, the 5th of G, here on the B string, by extending our little bar with the first finger at the 8th fret. This just gives a subtle variation of what we've already heard, and we can still use that little hammer on the G string, but it opens up the classic 1/4 blues lick. So by alternating this C with the 3-note F triad bar at the 10th fret on the D, G and B strings, we get that classic sound. So we're going into bar 3 of our 12 bar with that same pickup, but then playing this 1/4 blues lick, and then landing on this root note of C here. So far this is all pretty much standard blues sounding, but we're laying the groundwork to move into more jazz concepts, starting with a rootless voicing. A rootless voicing is simply a chord which doesn't include the root note, but the root is still implied to the listener nonetheless through the context in which the chord is heard. So what we're going to play here is a rootless C9. So we have first finger 7 on the A, third finger 8 on the D, second finger 7 on the G, and fourth finger 8 on the B. So we have E, B flat, D and G. Not a C in sight, but using a rootless voicing like this makes your playing feel less grounded, less obvious, and lets the listener know we're definitely going somewhere. Once again, we can slide in chromatically from below for extra movement. So in context, we're coming from this, with this chromatic slide into our rootless voicing, and as we have this E on the bottom, it strongly hints that the 4 chord of F is coming next. But we're not going straight to F, that would be too basic. So in true jazz style, let's 2-5-1 our way in. 2-5-1s are at the core of jazz music, but there are loads of ways we can use them in blues playing too. So here we'll approach our 4 chord of F with a 2-5-1 in the key of F, which is G minor as our 2 chord, and then C as the 5, and then landing on the 1 of F. But the key to a nice 2-5-1 is voicing, so let's not just play these basic chords. So starting with G minor, a voicing I really like for minor chords is this. So second finger on the root note on the A string, so here it's a G at the 10th fret, and then first finger 2 frets below, playing the minor 3rd, and then fingers 3 and 4 playing the G and B strings at the 10th fret, giving us a flat 7, and importantly this A and 9th on top, which really elevates this from a basic minor chord to something much more beautiful. So that's our G minor. Then for the C, I'm voicing it like this. So first finger on the low E at the 8th fret for our root note, and then second finger 8th fret of the D string, the B flat, our flat 7, and then third finger on the 9th fret of the G string for the 3rd. So this is just that shell voicing that we started with earlier, but we're fingering it differently to be able to add an extra note in, which will be here at the 9th fret on the B string, and A flat, which is the flat 13. So now we're getting into proper jazz territory. One thing to notice here, this flat 13, the A flat, is giving us a chromatic movement from that 9th of A on top of the G chord before. This is part of a concept called voice leading, which makes it feel like the chords have been carefully placed together. So we have our 2 chord of G minor, our 5 chord of C, and then onto the target chord of F, which we can play as we did earlier, but this time we can also bar this 3rd finger across all 3 top strings. But for now, we're not picking the high E, which gives us a G, the 9th as our highest note, and you'll see this completes this chromatic voice leading. Now over this F chord, which of course we can chromatically slide into again, we can also use a little slide on the top 3 strings with our bar. So at the 8th fret we get E flat, G and C, so really a C minor triad, but over the F it outlines an F9 sound, and then up 2 frets we have F, A and D, a D minor triad, but in these contexts gives us F13. So we can simply slide between these triads on the top 3 strings. Now normally you might expect another bar of F to come next, but we're going to move up to a diminished chord a half step above, so F sharp diminished. We can finger it like this. Second finger on the root note of F sharp here at the 9th fret on the A. Third finger, 10th fret on the D string. First finger, 7th fret on the G string. And fourth finger, 10th fret on the B. So coming from the F below, hear how this F sharp diminished chord brings extra movement and drives the progression forward.
Now the interesting thing about diminished chords is because they're based on a stack of minor thirds, they create an infinitely repeating pattern. So if you move up a minor third, you get exactly the same 4 notes in the next diminished chord in the sequence. So F sharp diminished, A diminished, C diminished and E flat diminished all have the same notes.
What this means is we can simply move this shape up 3 frets and find exactly the same notes, just in a different order. So what we'll do is start at the 9th, shift up to the 12th, and then up to the 15th. So all together with the F chord before we have Now to get back to our 1 chord of C, we're going to use a concept from jazz called a tritone substitution. I won't go into detail here, but essentially you can approach pretty much any chord with a dominant chord from a half step above. So the chord we're aiming for is our 1 chord of C, and we're going to voice it like this, with a 13 on top. You'll see this is just the same as the flat 13 voicing we used earlier, but this time the B string note is up 1 fret, to make the A an A natural, because we want a more brighter, settled sound. Then what we can do is shift all this up 1 fret to D flat, and then approach the C chord from there. Then once we're on the C chord, we can play sliding triads again, just like we did over the F earlier, but now we're going to be on the D, G and B strings, and because of the way the guitar is tuned, the note on the G string is going to be 1 fret back from the other 2. So we can start here at the 8th fret, slide up to the 10th and back down again. Something like that. Now on our way to our 5 chord of G, let's just look at a further voicing of our C chord, a 6-9. So we'll start down here with our second finger on the root note on the A string, this C here. Then a little bar at the 2nd fret on the D and G strings gives us an E, the 3rd and an A, the 6th, it's a 6th here rather than a 13th, just because there's no 7 in this chord. And then 2nd finger, 3rd fret of the B string, for a D note, the 9th. So it's a really nice voicing. Now what we want to do is move all of this up an octave to the 15th fret. And what we can do here is chromatically approach again from a half step below into our C6-9 chord, and then down 2 frets gives us B flat 6-9, which leads us perfectly into a 2-5-1 in the key of G, to land on our 5 chord of G. So this is exactly the same as we did earlier in F when we went G minor, C, into F, but now everything 2 frets higher. So A minor, D with that flat 13, landing on G9, our 5 chord. Now with this G9 chord, which we're playing exactly the same as the F earlier with this little bar on top, what we can do is use our little finger to go up to the 13th of the chord on the high E string. So this is going to be 2 frets up from wherever the chord ends. And we can come on and off of that note, and it's a great technique just to add some movement in. Then what we're going to do is go down chromatically through G flat to the F, and do exactly the same again with our little finger. But what we're actually going to do is come from G down through G flat, but then chromatically approach the F from below as well. So it's kind of enclosed from both sides. And then back to the 1 chord, it's going to be this classic blues lick there, which lands us back on our 1 chord of C. Then we have this cascading triplets run down the scale, landing on this G7 sharp 9 chord, which some people call the Hendrix chord. So it's very similar to the voicing of G9 we've been using, but now we're using the little finger to raise the 9th of semitone to A sharp, which gives this chord a sense of being both major and minor at the same time. You can, if you so desire, also let the little finger fret the high E at that 11th fret, which adds an E flat, the flat 13. And that's kind of extra jazzy. Then to end, let's use what's known as a backdoor approach, coming from behind to arrive back at the root. And the voicing we're going to use is the same as that 13 chord we've seen already, you know, this C13, but the difference is we're going to let our little finger bar onto the high E as well, which adds this 9th to the chord for extra colour. So our backdoor approach, we're going to start from B flat here, then into B natural, and then arrive back at C. But one thing I like to do is just raise the 7th on that C chord. So this note on the D string, this B flat, the flat 7, raise that up to a B as a major 7, which just softens the chord for a kind of extra jazzy ending. So let's put all of this together and we get this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.